Hello, my friends. Nice to be with you again. Last week, when we chatted, I talked to you about the need to have an open mind and the fact that we're moving into unknown space and that the solutions and the ideas, the kind of feelings, the concepts that we need in order to deal with these unknown realities that are coming our way. We need to be very open and permeable about all of that. If you be sensitive to it, we need to hear the messages when they show up. And I got a whole lot of, quite a few very kind and very warm responses to that, but I got some that weren't. And in particular, one person said, how could you say nice things about Vladimir Putin? I mean, how do you look? He's, and essentially she said, he's a killer. We all know that. How can you say good things about people who do what he does? And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that and try to give you my perspective on what this is like. Now, if you've ever started a business and if you've ever run a business, and that's most people have not, but, and they wouldn't understand this, but if you run a business, what you know is that the most fundamental kind of issue related to that business is how to make it survive, how to allow it to survive. Now, this is not so much the case if you're a nonprofit and you've got all volunteers, for instance, and nobody's getting paid. But if you've got employees and you're the CEO or the founder or some president of this organization, then those of you who have done this will resonate with me, and you will know that you sit there in the back of your mind all the time saying, how do I keep this thing going? And it's either in the back of your mind or it's in the front of your mind, because sometimes when it becomes acute, you're looking at the end of the week and saying, I don't have enough money to pay these people. What have I got to do? And how can I get what I need done in order to keep this thing alive? That is the animating concept of all institutions. You could make the argument that it's the case for human beings as well, but that's not the point tonight. That all institutions are trying to stay alive from one, and it's one thing if you're in the commercial space and you have a business that you're trying to generate revenue and you're trying to get clients and customers and other kinds of income coming in the door so that you can pay your people. And this, by the way, once you get a company to a certain size, then it has self-sustaining, and you don't quite worry about this in the same way, although any good CEO has got the idea in the back of his mind because some unknown thing could happen, or a big change in the market, or a horrible environment, contextual environmental thing, or whatever, and it could a breakthrough in technology that could obsolete what you do, and so you got to keep all that going. But if you're a business, you've got options and you have incentives to do that. It's not the same in the government. In the government, there is no built-in incentive for or the options and the ways in which you can kind of generate new ways and new solutions in order to deal with things. There essentially are no senior managers in the government who are sitting around thinking about, what do I got to do if this thing doesn't, if I can't keep this thing alive, because they have a guaranteed income stream, and they don't worry about that, and they have none of those kind of incentives, those kind of existential kind of overtones about keeping the thing going. But what people in the government do, and I've had very senior folks who are career folks in the government have explained to me, they said, we're all conservative. That's why we get into the government. And that's why we get government jobs, because we know that it's going to sustain us and we won't get fired, and we'll be able to get through and get to retirement and get a pension, and and we don't have to worry about the kinds of things that out in business do. And so they have a different kind of incentive that is kind of an existential one, and that is, how do they maintain the status quo enough that they can keep the whole thing going so that their budget doesn't get cut. I mean, their problem is that they've got to act like they're doing something and that they're producing something that is of value, such so that in the budgeting process that they don't get cut, but in fact they generate some more money so they can build a bigger kind of organization and so on. Now, they are very, very interested in keeping their organization and their situation going, because, as I've said, their whole purpose is to get to the end of this thing and retire. It's impossible, essentially, to find a mid-grade bureaucrat, and you can't have a lengthy conversation with them with that retirement doesn't show up either explicitly or implicitly in the conversation, because they are always looking down, how many years to go until I can get out, until I can get this, until I get retired. And so this is a very real thing, and they really need to keep the whole thing going. That's important because when you think about how they interface with the public, to whom they have no direct obligation. This is not like a commercial business that has to deal with customers and consumers and so on, and they've got to be nice to people, and or they won't come back or anything like that. They have none of those kinds of incentives, but their incentive is to keep the thing going no matter what, and so that they can get themselves retired at the end. And what most folks are not familiar with it, but was one of the last things that Barack Obama did when he was the president is he did it was the National Defense Authorization Act. He put a provision in it, and that made it legal for any government agency to lie to the American people if it was important. It wasn't even about national security. It was kind of like if it was important to their sustaining their mission, or some words to that effect. And so now they take away, not only that is there no direct incentive to be efficient, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, whatever, but now it's legal to lie about what you're doing and so on, as long as it keeps your machine going, again, so that you can get the thing to the end, so that you can get retirement. And what Catherine Austin Fitts will tell you as well is that they did the same thing in terms of the accounting. And they put in place an accounting policy that said no government agency has to tell the truth or acknowledge programs that have kind of national security implications. And so what you now got is kind of a wholesale kind of ability, approval to not, lie and cheat and steal and whatever else you want to do in there, because there's no accounting anywhere. And they've made it legal that you can do that. And so what you've got is a whole system now that is essentially ethically corrupted. There's no incentive for them to tell you the truth, or to acknowledge when they've made a mistake, for sure, or anything else. I mean, hardly anybody goes to the where you really get in trouble is if you threaten the status quo. If you it's very much like white corpuscles, and when there's some kind of a wound or something that's threatening to the life of the organism, they all come running up there to try to kill the infection and start to get things back to the way they were before. That's the way the system works, is that if there's somebody from inside of the system, i.e. a whistleblower, that can seize all these problems and stands up and ethically says, this is wrong and you shouldn't do it, my, oh my, do they launch after them, and they go after them in every way possible, even though, they may, the whistleblower is probably right, and all of the laws say that they need to protect the whistleblower, but boy, the system doesn't do that at all. So you now have, if you take that basic principle and you expand it within the kind of the bureaucratic framework, and you intentionally embrace the intelligence community and the Defense Department and those kinds of folks, you now are into a space where the folks who have the biggest, deepest secrets and do the most dastardly things in our society, one could argue, now have the cover and the incentives to lie about and not acknowledge any of this kind of stuff, and in fact conflate, make up any kinds of things. I heard a congressman or a senator, I think it was talking to one of the senior people in the FBI in a hearing here the other day, and he said, we've got this document here, and we've got the document, and the head of the FBI came in and told us that it didn't exist, and he didn't know anything. He didn't know anything about it, and it did not exist. And then one of his colleagues said, well, I've read it. And so he said, oh, well, then maybe it might exist. And it's unclassified, and I'm telling you, it's here. Why won't you make it available? And the guy just waffled all over the place and said, well, we got to be careful. And we went, and what it really was a document that said that not George Bush, but Joe Biden had been paid a whole, hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars by the by the Iranians for something that they were doing. And so they're protecting. And so the whole thing operates that kind of way. And they have all of the built-in incentives to do that. And if you remember then that what I said last week, I said is that the intelligence community owns the major media. William Colby in 1975 said we had at that time, the CIA had over 800 people who were embedded in the major media in the United States, whose job it was to kill articles and promote articles, pieces. And it's much bigger than that now. The estimates are that a third of the budget of the CIA is just to globally is to pay for all of these embedded people in the hall so they can control the media all around the world. And so you now are at a situation where when I tell you that, then if you're thinking about this at all, then you've got to understand, and you had to come to the conclusion rather rapidly, if you have any sense of how this system works, is that the system is using the media to lie to you. And they are doing that because they've got all of the cover and they have all of the internal incentives to do so, to not only cover up the negative stuff that they're doing, but they've got the laws that are broad enough that they can do whatever. And so, and the agency, they figured this, that's the first thing when the CIA goes into do a coup in some country. What do? The first thing they do is they grab the radio station and the television station and the newspaper so that they can control the information flow to the people so that they only know what they're being told. It's the same case writ large. And it's particularly the case now. It didn't used to be, but it's particularly the case now in the United States because they have been the funders of Google and Facebook and all of these social media and online kind of services that have taken over where the newspapers and television stations and radio stations used to be, and they own it all. And so when you get the same message that shows up everywhere on the same day in the same words, you've all seen these videos of the television commentators, the anchors that all start off, and it starts off and they start saying, today in such and such, whatever, and then they get another one that says today in such and such, whatever, and then the next one says today in such and such and whatever, and they just line them all up, and suddenly you've got literally 40, 50 different television stations that are all saying the same thing because they've all been programmed and told that this is what they've got to say. So in that context, if you have any sensitivity to that, and by the way, they've got everything. They've got NPR, they've got Newsweek, Time Magazine, and they got it. They got them all the big ones. And in that context, what you need to understand and keep in mind is that you are a prisoner of who you watch or listen to or follow, that you have no idea independently what is really going on in Ukraine or Yemen or any of these places, or Russia. It's all mediated through the media. It all comes to you through these different kind of sources, all of which are controlled, and they have no incentive to tell you the truth. Rather, they are controlled such that they have a message that they're trying to do. Like my friend Bill Colby says, to promote certain articles and to kill other ones. Now, if you tell me that Vladimir Putin is a thug, right? That thug, Vladimir Putin. What I know immediately is that you've been listening to or watching the New York Times or the MSNBC or CNN or one of the outreaches, the media that is controlled by the CIA. Because I know that kind of the operative kind of adjective to hang on Vladimir Putin is thug. That the people that I know who are working on that side always call him a thug, and that's the way it shows up in the media and other kinds of things. And so if you don't get outside of the mainline media, you live in an Orwellian. You have chosen to live in an Orwellian kind of a situation where everything is controlled and there's a message that the government's saying, and they'll do everything and tell you anything that they want to because it's legal about what they want to do to defend and advance their policies. And so if I suggest to you that you ought to listen to Vladimir Putin's speeches and you ought to listen to his press conferences and so on, and you've never done that, and the only thing you know about Vladimir Putin is what you've heard in what you've read, you've heard from the usual kind of sources, then you've been lied to. If you think that what's happening in Ukraine is what you've heard on NPR or on the New York Times, I've read in the New York Times or the Washington Post or any number of the other usual places, then you're being lied to because there's an agenda. There's a message. There's messaging that they're all trying to, that the government is trying to promote. And, they lied to you about COVID. Now they're lying to you about disease X. They've got all these agendas because there's a larger strategic agenda that they are trying to do is to dominate as many people as quickly as possible, because there is any of a number of things that appears now that is looming on the horizon at about 2027 or 2028 or 2029 that is going to just shut down the whole game, and they're running out of time. That's a subject for another kind of a conversation. But the fact is that they have an incentive in order to somehow get control of this whole process and get control of as many people as possible as they can, as quickly as they can, because they're running out of time. And so there are lots of very well-meaning, good people who are really trying to do well. I mean, I know them. I know bunches of them. And they really are trying to be as good a person as they can. but they're operating in this pseudo reality that is informed by the mainstream media, which has all got the incentives to lie to them and tell them whatever the government's trying to promote. And they trust those sources because they've always trusted those sources. They've always read the New York Times, or they've always listened to NPR, or whatever that turns out to be. And I can tell you that there was a time when I did too, because it was really, it was clear that there was an objectivity in, but it isn't now, and they have not been able to change. They haven't seen and felt and heard the shift when it became just propaganda, which is what it is right now. And so there's a kind of an underlying principle here that going into this new world, going into this extraordinary change, this shift to a new human and a new world, that you cannot be passive. This is not a process where you'll get swept into this new space by the waves of change, right? And that all you have to do is kind of lie on your surfboard, and you'll get driven into the shore and it'll be safe or something like that. It doesn't work that way. This is about human evolution. This is about growing to a higher level. This is about becoming someone different than you've been. This is about seeing yourself in the world in bigger, broader, more significant terms. This is about jumping the gap from the old reality up to the new one, somehow navigating, working your way up that way. And what that means is that you have got to lean forward into this space, that you've got to be full, you have to be active, you have to be engaged, you have to be asking questions all the time. This has got to be a constant kind of process in the back of your mind saying, how do I do this better? What are they saying? Is that a right idea? You're making your own decisions. You're not just being told what other people tell you. This is really quite central and important to this whole thing, because there are many folks, again, very well-meaning in this space, who say that, just meditate or whatever. It's not, to my understanding of the system, that's not enough. You've got to become someone different. It's not just kind of a passive feeling good, having good thoughts, right? Everything's going to be all right. This is about becoming somebody new and different, becoming this new human, engaging in this transformation, personal transformation process. This is about activating capabilities that you've never had before, that are resident and maybe have not been activated yet. This is about becoming somebody new. And then what that means is you just have to question the whole system and the whole process. And I can promise you the central kind of force that's driving this evolutionary push is not the government. It is, they are not the place where you should look for information about how to become a new human. They are really interested in maintaining and sustaining this old reality. And so it's just extraordinarily important for all of us to just increasingly open up with as much. You can't believe everything you hear, but you've got to listen and you got to question it, and you've got to kind of push yourself into this kind of uncomfortable space and say, maybe there's what's out there that I haven't heard about, and what did somebody say that made sense? That little thing really made sense. That was interesting, and you got to capture the information wherever you can find it. So thank you very much.